G'day ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to War Thunder with Mags. Today we'll be taking a look at the reward tank for the completion of 6 Winter's Holiday events, a tank often called overpowered at the moment, the LVT A4 ZiS-2. But is it really overpowered? The LVT A4 is a rank 2 battle rating 2.3 amphibious tank of the US forces, and is a rather interesting tank in that it is not exactly American. The A4 variant was originally armed with a 75mm howitzer in production, with some tanks being converted to carry a flamethrower for close infantry support. The Chinese People's Liberation Army, however, captured a number of LVT A4s during the Chinese Civil War, and a number were modified to carry the Soviet ZiS-2 57mm cannon, effectively making the version we see in-game a Chinese variant. This modification allowed for the creation of the single most powerful anti-tank version of the LVT A4, but also introduced a couple of rather glaring weak points. But we'll come to those in just a moment. First off, let's talk about the gun. As I just mentioned, the main gun is a Soviet 57mm ZiS-2 cannon that can carry a maximum of 76 shots and comes with a selection of 3 shell types. The default round is a BR-271 armor-piercing high-explosive ballistic cap shell with 119mm of penetration at 100 meters, 106mm of penetration at 500 meters, and 91mm of penetration at 1000 meters. This is a fantastic shell capable of one-shotting most tanks the LVT will face. The next of the default rounds is of course the standard HE shell, the 0271 shell, which has a 220g explosive core with 5mm of penetration across the board. Useful for taking out flatbeds, but not worth carrying more than 1 or 2 in my opinion. Now, as the LVT is not a premium tank, there are unlocks to collect, with the only unlockable shell type being the BR-271K. If you feel you need more pen, this is the shell to carry, with an 18 grams of explosive filler in the center and 134mm of pen at 100 meters, 111mm at 500 meters, but dropping to only 97mm at 1000 meters, with a shell velocity of 990 meters per second. This shell is the reason the ZiS has gained a quick reputation of being overpowered. It can effectively one-shot any tank it faces in its battle rating, and has very little drop outside of 700 meters, allowing for precision shooting. The reload speed is also only 7.7 seconds with a max trained crew, making the LVT one of the most dangerous tanks you can face in standard matchmaking when it comes to armament. The gun, however, does have some drawbacks. It has a traverse speed of 10.2 degrees per second, however it also only has a forward firing arc of around 60 degrees. This is because the ZiS gun was effectively a Chinese field modification on a hull never designed for that kind of weapon. Modifications made to the turret to allow for the breech limited turret traverse, meaning the LVT is more of a tank destroyer than an actual tank. Further, while the gun is able to elevate by a good 15 degrees, the gun is also so large that only 5 degrees of gun depression is available, limiting hull down options, and that will be important later. So next up, let's talk about mobility. In this area I was also rather surprised. At 18.4 tons with a 250 horsepower engine, the LVT is able to motor along at around 40 km an hour at max, with a stable speed off-road of between 30 to 35 on relatively level terrain. Hills and rough terrain are also no problem, as the LVT is able to climb slopes of up to 41 degrees, allowing it to get to most locations on any map with little issue. Acceleration is also quite nice, well able to reach its maximum speed quickly when needed. So far, all of this is looking good for the LVT, but all good things must come to an end. Let's talk about the size and the armour. The LVT is big, really big. Size for size, it's taller, longer, and just as wide as a Panther. It's the single biggest tank in rank 2 and larger than most tanks in rank 3. And at its thickest point, the LVT's hull only has 12.7mm of armour. The side armour of the LVT is only 6.35mm thick, but does consist of 2 layers. The outside layer is on the outside of the track, and the second layer forming the inner hull, which is again 6.35mm. Also, all sides of the raised turret platform and the whole top deck is only 6.35mm thick as well. At this thickness, angles are almost irrelevant, with the only place you will see bounces from any gun in the game being the front lower hull, which by virtue of also being a boat is rounded and angled back at starting at 45 degrees, but increasing out to a maximum of 70 degrees at its extremes. But bouncers here should not be relied upon, as on level ground almost all main cannon tank shells in the game will simply penetrate, with bouncers usually only occurring when the lower half of the front hull is hit, where the angle is higher, or when the lower plate is fired upon by a tank that is firing from a higher elevation, increasing the hull angle into auto bounce territory. In practice, the hull can be penetrated by any tank in the game from almost any angle with almost any shell inside of 500 meters. The turret does a little better on the sides and the rear with a thickness of 25.4mm, but contains a massive flaw. Remember how I mentioned before that adding the ZiS gun introduced a couple of weaknesses? Well, it introduced two. The first was the limited gun traverse, as I mentioned before. The second was the mantlet. See, the original mantlet of the LVT needed to be removed to fit the ZiS gun into the LVT, and as such, Chinese engineers replaced it with the standard gun shield that came with the ZiS cannon. That shield is only 5mm thick, which means the front of the turret, the place most likely to get hit on the whole turret assembly, also has the thinnest armour on the tank in total, lacking even the thickness to defend the crew from HE detonations. More than that, the 5mm of armour is just thick enough to activate the explosive primers on most AP-HE rounds in the game, meaning that a direct hit to the plate will either cause an immediate shell detonation with the resulting explosion killing the crew and destroying the breach, or it will arm the shell, which will then detonate upon hitting the 25.4mm thick inside rear armour of the turret. As you can imagine, this pretty much will guarantee the death of all three crew members that man the turret, but as this section of the turret sits directly over the engine and the ammo racks, a direct hit in this manner will often cause an ammo rack detonation killing the tank, or simply kill all of the turret crew and simultaneously set the tank on fire. I could go into more here, such as the gun being mounted in the rear half of the tank, but being unable to fully traverse requires the LVT to stick between a third and half of its hull out of cover to fire around corners, but there's no need. The LVT is simply one of the easiest tanks in the game to kill, and with it being so large, hitting it is not much of a challenge. Self-propelled anti-aircraft guns can wipe this tank out by simply randomly spraying the hull, which will almost always result in multiple crew deaths. As such, I found the LVT to be best played from cover or as a sniper, engaging targets from behind teammates in a support role, paying careful attention to limit your exposure as much as possible. The last thing to talk about, of course, is the LVT's amphibious abilities. Sadly, this is more of a novelty than anything else. The LVT seems to propel itself through the water exactly the same way as it does on land, by rotating its tracks, and not by using something semi-useful in the water like a propeller. This means you are looking at a top speed of 8 km an hour when in the drink, with a beautiful white rooster tail to give away your location on the off chance that the enemy is so blind as to not notice the new aircraft carrier in the lake on Poland. The LVT also bobs like a cork while in the water. This does make it hard to accurately hit anything, although not impossible with careful timing of the bobs. In short here, I've yet to find a map where the amphibious abilities of the LVT are useful, but entering the water does nullify your two primary advantages, mobility and the accuracy of your gun. I would avoid putting the LVT in the water unless absolutely necessary. So, is it OP? Well, it is very mobile with one of the best guns at its battle rating, but I really struggle to call anything that can be penetrated by British default 7.92 ammunition overpowered. It's a fun novelty tank. It's a massive gun with no armour that's the size of a small 2-bedroom apartment. Fun to bring out and blat a few people in the face while nobody knows how to kill you and is very intimidated by the massive weapon that you're carrying. Not so fun once people work out that they can literally shoot you anywhere and do crippling damage to the tank, if not kill you outright. But of course, that's just my opinion. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the LVT, and remember to hit that like button and to subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, drive smart, drive safe, and I'll catch you on the battlefield.